Welcome to the She's Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. Hey, it's been a while. Where you been? I know, that's what you are asking me. I have been in Papua New Guinea for the past 2.5 weeks on my annual tour there, and I am blown away every time I go to this amazing island nation. It's really difficult for me to describe in words, but in short, this country is filled with more than 800 tribes, all speaking a different language. And I go every August for the Mount Hagen Sing Sing, and this is a huge event. It brings together about 90 of these tribes, and it's in a huge showground. And you get in the middle of that, and it's a cacophony of singing and dancing and drumming, all of these groups at the same time, and they're all trying to outperform each other. It's really quite otherworldly. It's like nothing you can experience anywhere in the world. I promise you, it is life-changing. And I do go every year because I run tours there. If you'd like to see photos, I'd encourage you to friend me on Facebook and follow me on Instagram at WanderGal, W-A-N-D-E-R, Gal, WanderGal. And that'll give you a better idea of this incredible event and all the other sing-sings and events that we attend. Now, if you're interested, I've got 2 tours next year coming up. One is my usual cultural tour, and the other is being led by National Geographic photographer Allison Wright. So same dates, same activities that we'll be doing, but just 2 different tours. I'll be leading one and Allison will be leading the other. And both of these include at least 4 days of festivals. And you can find all that information at wandertours.com, W-A-N-D-E-R, tours.com, all one word. So here I am back in Seattle, and I am enjoying the final days of summer. It's actually sunny. Sometimes when I come back, the weather's not so great, end of August, but it's just been gorgeous and warm. And I thank you for being here today for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. Now, this is episode 101, and I hope you had a chance to listen to episode 100. And that actually included a roundup of many of my guests explaining what they think it means to be bold. I have received so much great feedback from that episode, so hopefully you found some inspiration in it as well. It was a long episode, so I really hope you took the time to listen to it because it was pretty cool. Now, before I get to today's conversation, a really big welcome to you, whether you're new to the show or a longtime listener. The She's Bold podcast is where I feature conversations with women who come from a wide variety of backgrounds, but they all have inspirational stories to share, and really they epitomize being bold. But being bold means different things to different people. We all have our struggles. We have our weaknesses. And being bold means being willing to tackle the things we struggle with, to face them, to move through them, really to own up to them, and to not let fear get the better of us. I read something recently about the difference between fear and anxiety. Fear being reality-based, such as a fear of a known threat like a bear, right? And anxiety is about an anticipated threat, an imagined future or past. And I think it's really good to separate those out just so we understand ourselves better and we respond to the world. You know, that's just super helpful. Is this a fear or is this an anxiety? And whether it's working through fear or anxiety, my guests usually are being bold about their decision-making process. They are being raw, vulnerable, introspective. They are living life with gusto. And that is certainly true about today's guest. Now, I know you'll find inspiration in these conversations, especially today, and hopefully have ways to apply the stories and the words of wisdom that you hear. Hopefully you can apply that to your own life. If you are impacted, really, I would love to hear your feedback. I can't tell you how much it means to me. You can leave a message at 877-280-5170 or email me at beth@shesboldpodcast.com. Now, I also want to take a moment to thank my Patreon supporters. These folks enjoy the podcast and show their support with a monthly pledge of just $2 or more, just $2 a month. I've just added some additional benefit levels so you can get access to bonus content as well as some pretty cool Be Bold swag. Now, by the way, that bonus content, it's usually in the form of a question I ask guests. And this week's bonus question is a bit mind-blowing, but you'll have to join us over at Patreon to hear that. Check out shesboldpodcast.com/Patreon for details. Okay, today's guest is Nichole Doane. Nichole is a trauma nurse at Harborview Medical Center here in Seattle. Now, Harborview, as many people in my neck of the woods knows, is the trauma center for the Pacific Northwest. It's where you want to be taken in the case of a traumatic injury or burn. But I didn't want to speak to Nichole simply because of her work as a trauma nurse. Instead, it was because of an accident she had while canyoneering. This near fatal fall changed the trajectory of her life. Now, Nichole was on a canyoneering trip in August of 2017 when she fell about 60 feet. What happened to her in the minutes leading up to the fall and the hours following it when she was awaiting a rescue was nothing short of a miracle. It's really incredible to me the way she processed what was going on and then, frankly, lived to tell about it. Since her accident and recovery, Nichole is now spending her time helping those in crisis as a speaker, by helping others through traumatic experiences, and by bringing to light the PTSD that happens within the community of public servants. And you'll understand what exactly I mean as you listen to our conversation. In short, I've never heard anyone explain their near-death experience quite like Nichole does. And I was really quite moved by the way she's taken that experience and turned it into such a force for good. With that, please enjoy this conversation with Nichole Doane. You had mentioned that you're just saying yes to a bunch of things now, like the universe is opening to you. What kind of things are you saying yes to? People would come and visit me in the hospital and they'd want to hear about my experience. And they're coming in with this burden of like, how am I going to support this person? And I think it was unique to them to see someone who was just inspired by it. I would talk about the rainbows reflecting off the water and how it was the most beautiful moment of my life and how freeing it was. And they had this sense of, is this girl crazy or what exactly is going on here? So they wanted to hear more, and the story seemed to inspire people, to look for the positive in tragedy. And so, people started saying, well, you need to write a book, or you need to do this or that or whatever. And I have a lot of friends in healthcare and in the search and rescue community now that all of this has happened, and they just started saying, you have a message to share. And I would really, we're really struggling to just keep our heads above water. And I think that it might help people to hear your story, So I started agreeing to come to lectures. I did a lecture for the Medic One program here in Seattle and for the Bellevue Fire Department. And through the research prior to doing the lectures, I found out that there's so much suffering going on in healthcare. The rate of suicide is profound. Physician suicide is 2 times that of active duty military. The rates of drug addiction, divorce, obesity, you name it, it's all just rampant in healthcare because of the secondary trauma. What is secondary trauma is kind of like the trauma that the provider experiences just from being in the environment where they're seeing so much trauma, and how there's a lack of education about how to help yourself, how to protect yourself in that environment. So there's a lot of people who go into it for the right reasons without any tools of how to, maintain a sense of stability and groundedness. And instead of figuring it out, a lot of times people develop a lot of negative coping strategies. And it's kind of one of those fields where you don't talk about it because it's this underlying sense of you knew what you were getting into when you got into it. So
before we get too far down that path, because I want to explore some more about that, because I'm one of those people, I had no idea that was such an issue in kind of the service providing, the search and rescue and doctors and that sort of thing in that particular industry.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about your accident, because that's been really the catalyst for so much of what you've been doing and kind of how you're helping others.
Yeah.
And talk about that, and then we'll kind of unravel all of that stuff and the things
Sure.
that you're saying yes to now as well, like the different lectures and programs that you're doing.
Yeah.
So I guess wherever you want to start in terms of that
Sure.
accident.
So it was the day of the total eclipse in August of 2017. And everyone was driving to Oregon to go see it from the, from the best vantage point. And I had a hotel room booked to go.
And this was in Oregon.
No, the fall actually happened in Washington. So the day before the eclipse, a friend of mine called and said, "Do you want to go canyoneering?" And I said, "Well, I have this hotel." And she said, "Well, do you really want to be stuck on the road with all of those people driving towards the eclipse? Or do you want to be in a canyon and experience it in a different way?" So, I said, okay, to going canyoneering. And that night I had this dream that I was falling. And in the dream, I wasn't scared, but it was so vivid that when I woke up, I questioned whether or not that was a sign, And so I went to work the next day and I was talking to a friend. I said, I had this dream and I have this sense that something is going to happen on this trip, this canyoneering trip. And he said, "Well, don't go, you definitely should not go." And I said, "Well, I don't feel scared. I just feel like something is going to happen. And I don't know what it is. Am I going to meet some hot guy on the trail, or am I going to, it was like the sense of
fall
excitement.
in love.
Right,
Yeah, right.
Right. So I didn't know exactly. So I decided to go anyway. We go and we, hike up to the top and we experience the eclipse, and then we drop into the canyon. And this was a series of 15 rappels. We were about halfway through the day. So the 9th rappel of the day, which happened to be the longest rappel we would do, it was a 300-foot waterfall with a ledge partway down. So you could break it up into two 150-foot rappels, basically. So that's what we did. And a couple of my friends went down before me, and they didn't have any problems. But there was a lot of anxiety about this specific rappel because I guess just a few days prior to us being there, a girl had fallen in this particular canyon and died.
Did you know that before you went to bed the previous night?
No, I didn't know anything about this girl. And then a friend of mine that I was climbing with that day had been on this particular rappel a week before with her son, and the rope almost got cut because of some jagged rocks that they were pulling the rope across. And so she was very concerned that we were going to have an accident with that. So we were taping the rock face and getting everything set up just right, because there was a little bit of anxiety about this specific spot because of the history of it. But, my friends went down before me. They didn't have any problems. So then it was my turn. And the first 50 feet of this rappel, you're kind of walking down a rock face until you get to a ledge where you drop over to kind of a free hanging area.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain rappelling, exactly how that works?
Yeah. So canyoneering is kind of like a rock climbing adventure sport where instead of climbing on a rock, just one specific rock, the point is to rappel through a canyon so that you can traverse the riverbeds and kind of become part of the canyon.
And then how do you get back up?
You have to, once you drop in, you're committed. It's very difficult.
You're climbing back up, you're saying.
Yeah, you can't climb back up. There are situations where you're able to do that with specific equipment, but once you drop in, you have to continue down the path until you find a safe place to get out.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And all of these,
so you're rappelling down and then you're walking
the riverbed and then rappelling again, until through this series of rappels until you get to a safe place. And there's all this beta out there about, how to do it, what's been anchored, what's safe. And
I see. And that's called canyoneering.
Canyoneering.
Then. Okay.
Mm-hmm. A pretty young sport.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, that's what we were doing. And this was the 9th rappel, and I was walking down the rock face. I didn't realize that I was going to drop over to a free hanging area, and I was having a good time. It was our 9th rappel of the day. I was feeling confident. I might have been moving a little bit too fast because when I dropped over to the free hanging area is when I made my fatal mistake. And I knew it as soon as I saw that both of my hands were above my head in rappelling, there's something called your brake hand, and it does exactly what it sounds like it's supposed to do, only it doesn't work when it's above your head. It has to be down by your hip. So as soon as I saw...
So brake hand meaning it's holding the rope down to stop you from falling.
It's your only source of slowing your momentum. So when I saw both of my hands above my head, my mind just started spinning out. I thought, what am I going to do here? Like I'm not physically strong enough to correct this. And I couldn't, there were multiple things that I could have done in that moment, safety maneuvers, but I couldn't think of them. My mind was just spinning out. So I started saying things to myself like, oh my God, I always wondered what it would feel like to know that you're going to die. I guess this is it. I always wondered what I would do in this moment. And it was one of those moments where just how you prepare for a stressful situation has to take over. You don't have the opportunity to make a choice. It has to be like a visceral reaction. And I think because I had practiced sitting in intensity so much with my yoga practice and learning how to self-regulate, that it just became my natural response was to take a deep breath and try to slow things down in that moment. So that's basically what I did. I took a deep breath and looked around, and in that moment of sheer terror, it's kind of like you have blinders on.
And this is as you're falling?
Right.
And it was a 60-foot fall, is that right?
Yeah, 60-foot fall. So I didn't fall right away. I realized I had made my mistake, and I'm holding on to the rope, and in that moment I'm realizing that this is the last moment I have, and if this is the last moment I have, I want it to be mine, and I don't want to be scared. I don't want to die in terror. I want to see something else. I want to live this moment and take control of it. So I took a deep breath and looked around, and, I'm like, well, if this is the last moment I'm going to be alive, what do I want to be doing? And I'm a mom, so the only thing I wanted to do was to tell my daughter that I love her one more time, and...
How old is your daughter?
She is 17 now. Yeah, but she was 15 at the time. And she wasn't with me there that day, of course, so I couldn't physically tell her goodbye, but I thought, maybe if I just screamed to her from the depths of my soul, she might be able to feel me one more time, so that was kind of the scene of like hands slipping, ground coming, feeling like you're literally being choked by this sense of terror, and then me just choosing to just, instead of be caught in the terror, to just shoot love in every direction and try to reach her in some profound way in this last moment. And that's what I wanted to focus on, is the love that I felt. That seemed to be the most prevalent thing. Nothing else really seemed to matter.
Did you say something?
I was screaming inside of me. I couldn't form a word, but it was just me kind of energetically shooting love. And when I was able to break out of that terror, I could see more, take in more, and I could, instead of just seeing the ground rushing at me, I could see the waterfall that was next to me and the rainbows reflecting off the water. And it became the most beautiful moment of my existence, to take control of that and choose to see love and beauty in this moment where I could have just focused on the terror, And so at one point I looked over while I'm slipping, and I see this ledge over to the side that I could have sworn wasn't there before, but of course it was always there. I just wasn't able to see it because I had the blinders on. But it was as if the love in that moment kind of opened my visual field so that I could see more. And that ledge was a little bit higher than the original fall would be. So I thought, I'm really slipping now. I have no choice. This is my one last Hail Mary, So I kind of swung myself in one direction so that I could fling myself out over that ledge. And then I had to just let go of the rope completely, or else the rope would pull me back off course of the ledge that I was shooting for.
So the ledge, that's what was the 60-foot drop?
Right.
Whoa.
And the other would have been...
So you saw that 60 feet down and thought, that's my target.
That's my target. If I wouldn't have hit that, I don't think I would have lived. So I swung myself in one direction and flung myself over that ledge, and then I just let go. So now I'm free falling 60 feet up, and in my mind, I am centered, like I am in my body in a way that I can feel every cell and really experiencing this last moment of my life. And the thoughts that were going through my head were like, just let the fall take you, be like water, absorb it all in your core, roll down your back and just don't hit your head,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How long do you think that took, that fall? Has anybody told you, or do you have any sense of, was it 10 seconds, 5 seconds?
I was probably holding on, slipping for at least a couple of minutes before I had to let go in the actual act of falling.
And did your canyoneering friends know what was going on with you, that you were slipping, or were they just doing their own thing at that point for those couple of minutes?
Yeah, there were a couple of friends that were above me that could not see anything of what was going on. And then the couple who had rappelled down before me didn't know that I was in trouble until I was really in trouble and there wasn't anything they could do. And they watched the fall happen and weren't able to intervene in any way. So it was a really interesting scenario because I'm with some really highly qualified, highly trained trauma nurses who are the people you want to be with if you're in an accident, but they're unable to help in any way. So I think the PTSD that they experienced was way more than what I experienced in that moment.
So a couple of minutes on the rope you are, and then do you know how long the actual fall was?
I am not certain. It felt like forever. It felt like I was like, I'm still falling, still falling. Okay. And I'm thinking, well, at least my feet are under me. At least I'm not going head first. At least I can see all of this moment.
Then what happened when you hit?
I hit the ground. I never lost consciousness, which is very rare. I landed on my feet. I rolled down my spine. I didn't hit my head. I had on this backpack that protected my spine somewhat. I had a helmet on that protected my head. I had a wetsuit on that was 2 sizes too small. So I think that helped to contain me a bit in that moment. And, as soon as I realized that I was still alive, the very next thing that I experienced was, I looked down at my body and I saw that both of my ankles were pointed in weird directions. And I thought, as a nurse, the first thing that I thought was obvious deformity. And then, I thought, well, my ankles should be causing me a great deal of pain right now, but actually can't feel them. I have very limited sensation in my legs. And so I'm thinking, obvious spinal cord injury. I had this crushing chest pain that was preventing me from taking in an adequate breath. So I'm thinking, maybe I have a pneumothorax, one of my lungs has collapsed or something like that. So I'm laying there hours away from help, and, the physical pain and the struggling to breathe, and most of all, the uncertainty was just overwhelming. And so I'm laying there realizing in that moment just how much I don't know. My idea of who I am is no longer valid in this moment. Before this moment, I knew who I was, I knew where I was going, and I had a great idea about how I was going to get there. But now my perception of reality is completely it's not valid anymore. So the only way forward was to let go of all preconceived ideas about, who I am and what this life should be. And as soon as I realized that I had to let go of control in order to move forward, that's when everything changed. I was able to see more in that moment, and pain was a part of it, but it was no longer the whole story. So yeah, pain was at the forefront. It was coloring everything else because it was like the most prevalent sensation. But underneath the pain, I'm laying in a beautiful forest under a 300-foot waterfall on a warm, sunny day, and the mist from the waterfall is cooling my skin, and there's rainbows reflecting off the water. And I'm surrounded by some of the most compassionate people that I know, and the beauty in them trying to help me through the struggle became more prevalent than the pain.
How long were you there by yourself before somebody could get to you?
a matter of minutes.
Okay. So they rappelled down?
The people that were on the ground tried to give hand signals to the people that were up above to say, something's happened to Nichole. And the people up above thought through the hand signal gestures that I was dead. And they thought they were climbing down to my dead body. Mm-hmm. And they were just really focused on trying to keep themselves centered and safe. Mm-hmm. But then once they got down to me and realized I was still alive, then that's kind of where it all amped up a bit, because now it's not, a recovery operation, it's a rescue.
Yeah.
And
they have to figure out how to get
get me out. Yeah, how to get me out. And that's when the search and rescue operation was called. We had a radio beacon, called multiple different companies to try and figure out a way to get out. But it was a very difficult place to get someone out of. We're halfway down a 300-foot waterfall on the backside of the water. And for a helicopter to come and fly in and hover in that spot was a very dangerous situation. So it took quite a few phone calls before we found someone who was able to come and do this. And the Snohomish County Search and Rescue Organization is who said, yes, we'll come.
Mm. What did you say before? Because I want to hear about the rescue also, but before they came, what were you saying to your friends? Because are they on the ledge with you at that point?
They're on the ledge with me.
And you're laying down.
I'm kind of draped across boulders and trees, and we knew I had obvious spinal cord injury, so we couldn't, move me mm-hmm. in any way, or we might cause more damage. So they really, the main conversation was them holding me or trying to support me in that position. Me saying, I don't think I can handle this anymore. I don't care if there's more damage. I'm having too much pain. Can you just move me just a little bit? Mm-hmm. So my friend would pick up my arm and move it over a little bit and say, is that better, Nichole? And I'd say, okay, yeah, that's better. Because we all knew there was really nothing to be done. And I was laying there looking up at my two friends who are trauma nurses, and they're giving each other eyes above me. And finally, my friend said, you know what? If we're thinking it, she's thinking it too. She's a trauma nurse too. So let's just say it out loud,
Right. You know what those what the eye rolls are. The looks.
We're kind of like, if we make it through this first hour, maybe we'll be okay. But in that moment, we thought, I'm going to bleed out here in the forest, and there's nothing anybody can do about it, so it was a hard moment.
Did you have external injuries, or it was all internal? Like when you say bleed out, was it internal?
Well, it looked as if my ankles were open fractures. My feet were pointed in weird directions. I didn't have anything like, head trauma or anything gruesome to look at. We, of course, didn't want to manipulate my body in a way that we could actually see what was underneath. And we kind of felt like this wetsuit was maybe containing and acting as sort of like a tourniquet in a way. So we just kind of left everything as it was. Mm-hmm. But it was still obvious by looking at me even with all my clothes on that something was definitely horribly wrong. My pelvis was definitely broken. My back was definitely broken. Ooh. And I had this chest pain or pressure that was, I could hardly breathe.
And you didn't have a clue what that was exactly.
Yeah. In that moment, didn't really know mm-hmm. what it was. We thought maybe I had a pneumothorax, and so.
Which is a collapsed lung.
A collapsed lung. Yeah. And so how you treat that is by venting that space. And we were kind of searching around looking for some kind of a tube. Does anyone have an ink pen or something? If like this goes really south, can we just stab her with, Mm-hmm. So those were the weird conversations we're having out there as trauma nurses in the middle of the woods trying to figure it out.
So how did the rescue, you said Snohomish County Search and Rescue?
Yeah, they came. So I guess within 5 minutes of getting the call, afterwards, I hear that there were hundreds of people on the ground moving in my direction. There's Swiftwater Rescue Group. There's a land rescue group. There's air rescue. And they're all moving towards me because they don't know which one is going to actually be the group to rescue me. Mm-hmm. And so the land people are trying to figure out a way to set up, a zip line to try to get me out. And the Swiftwater group is trying to figure out if they're the ones that can, get to me quicker. But it ended up being the helicopter rescue organization that was able to get to me first.
So what did they do? They came in and hovered over and dropped in?
Hovered over, rappelled out of the helicopter from the highest point of the waterfall. So I'm looking up and seeing, it looked like an episode of Platoon or something, like these badass guys dropping out of the sky to come to my rescue. And
was it the handsome guy you were looking for?
Handsome guys, they all were. And
the one that you thought about, well, maybe my dream was about
right,
that.
Exactly.
It's a 2-for-1.
My friends are just like cheering at the side of them because at that point we had been there for over 3 hours, with them not knowing if I was going to live or die. And so they rappelled out of the sky and they were just extraordinary. They were in this very chaotic environment, but able to figure out how to regulate and contain and not only keep themselves safe, but keep my friends safe and treat my pain and treat my anxiety. And they were just extraordinary. It was really something to watch. So they basically started an IV on me and they gave me a medication called ketamine. That's a dissociative medication that allowed them to pick me up and put me into this kind of carrying case that they were able to hook up to a line and pull me up to the helicopter with. So that process took probably about another hour.
So the ketamine, you said it's a dissociative, meaning no pain, or meaning it just kind of takes you away from the experience?
Yeah, it takes you, completely dissociates you from what is happening.
So where were you?
In the real world. So I, for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, was... I don't remember those moments where they picked me up and put me into the carrying case, but I do remember waking up. And I woke up and saw my friend standing over me. And I said, Sandy, what is going on around here? And she said, you're being rescued, Nichole. Like, I said, you mean I don't have to walk out of here? This is great. This is just great,
Uh-huh.
So it was a really good drug. Basically.
Yeah. It sounds like
I mean, it was exactly what I needed.
Oh my gosh.
And then I kind of floated up in the sky towards this helicopter. And yeah, it was beautiful. It was probably a lot of the effects of the stress and the trauma and the ketamine, but it was one of the coolest rides of my life.
But you were also having this really like heartfelt, beautiful moment before the drugs too. I mean, you were in this state where you were experiencing life at its fullest.
Definitely. I was trying to take it all in, not just focus on the negative and see a more complete picture of reality. And yes, there is tragedy in this moment, but there's also enormous beauty, and so by focusing all of my attention on the beauty, that became my lifeline, that became the thing that was able to keep me through. And I think it actually prevented me from having PTSD from this experience because it was kind of a protective mechanism. I wasn't focused on the tragedy. Yes, it was there, but the real story was these amazing humans that were with me and the beautiful place I was in.
Right. That was the real story.
Right. Yeah.
Huh. So what was the extent of your injuries? Where did they bring you? What hospital?
So they picked me up. The airlift group brought me to a school field where they transferred me over to an organization called Airlift Northwest because of my difficulty breathing. They thought I was going to need a higher level of care and they were going to have to, intubate me and put me on machines possibly en route. So they transferred me to Airlift Northwest, and the nurse who happened to be in the airlift helicopter that day was the husband of a trauma nurse that I work at the facility that I work at, which is Harborview Medical Center. So as soon as I saw him, he said, I've got you. I am going to take you to my wife who's waiting in the trauma bay at the hospital that you work at, and they have cleared that trauma bay just for you, which was extraordinary because Harborview it services Washington, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho.
It's a huge trauma center.
It services such a huge area, and for them to be able to have a moment where they could, clear a trauma bay just for me was kind of another one of those coincidental things that happened in this. And so the husband of my friend takes care of me and drops me with his wife in the trauma bay at my hospital. And I was just surrounded by friends I felt so safe and cared for. It's, every nurse's worst nightmare to hear that you're going to have to go to the hospital you work at.
Mm-hmm.
I think because you're so exposed, not only physically, but emotionally in front of all of your colleagues. And, but in that moment when they said, ma'am, we're going to take you to Harborview. Is that okay with you? I said, yes,
because you
please.
knew that's the best.
That's where all my friends are. That's where I feel safe.
Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they won't let anything happen to you.
Yeah.
And then what were the extent of your injuries and what actually was going on?
Well, it was funny. We were all so concentrated on my feet pointing in weird directions, and we were certain that my ankles were broken. As soon as I get into the trauma bay, somebody whipped around the end of the bed and hit my foot, which everyone had been so protective of all this time. And the funniest thing happened. My boot, I had on these neoprene boots. I guess I hit the ground hard enough that my boots kind of a little bit slid off the end of my feet. And so they were kind of halfway hanging on. So when someone came around the corner of the bed, my boot just kind of fell off onto the ground, and we were all just shocked and amazed. Oh my God, it's not that her ankles are broken. It's that her boots are barely hanging on the ends of her feet.
That's hilarious.
It was so funny.
Oh my God.
I have no idea how I landed on my feet and did not break every bone in my legs, but I ended up with just kind of a shattered pelvis, and
from the hit,
from the
right,
impact. I told you, I was telling myself, just let the fall take you, absorb it all in your core. And that's what I did. I had kind of absorbed it all in my pelvis. And because of that impact, it shoots up your spine. And oftentimes you have a low back injury as well.
Like a compression fracture or something?
Well, it could have been a compression fracture, and then also the impact of hitting the ground. But I did end up with a fracture in my spine and a bit of a spinal cord injury due to the bone fragments kind of pushing into the spinal cord when I hit. So I do have limited sensation in my legs after the injury, but everything else was kind of best case scenario,
What was the lung issue, the reason why you couldn't breathe?
We never really figured it out. And the neurosurgeon said maybe it was a referred pain from the fracture in my spine. Sometimes you start to feel sensations in other areas of your body, but I didn't have a collapsed lung. It was just this referred pain that was preventing me from taking a deep breath. Is what we kind of came up with. So really limited injuries from a fall like that. I mean, I've seen in my experience as a nurse, people die from so much less, from a 10-foot fall off a ladder.
Right, I know, that's what I've heard. Yeah.
I had never seen anyone live through a fall like what I experienced. So
what do you attribute that to?
I don't know. I have the spiritual side of me says I was obviously supposed to live through this because there were so many coincidences that seemed to just set me up for success, in this moment. And so if I'm thinking magically, that's kind of my understanding of it. I'm not sure. And it's also a huge responsibility. I feel like, after watching so many people die from so much less, I'm kind of faced with this now. What do I do? What do I do with this gift? Why was I given the gift of living and other people died from so much less? And what am I going to do to make it worth everything that I've, seen? What can I do with the rest of my life to make an impact and feel kind of worthy of having this opportunity to live when so many others have died, On
the more practical level, and I do totally agree with the magical thinking of it. And you're absolutely right. There were so many things that just kind of came together that made it happen and gave you the opportunity to live, for sure. But there was something in you that happened. You referred back to your yoga practice where you were able to center yourself, see a way out. Somebody else might have panicked and just dropped.
Yeah.
But you centered yourself, did that swing, let go of the rope, and then somehow, that to me is a miracle in itself that you were able to do that. But then you were able to fall in such a way that you didn't just land on your heels, and shatter everything, or land right on your feet and shatter everything. Was that just kind of luck, do you think, in terms of actually how you fell?
Well, it was definitely mindful the way I was thinking about it. I wasn't just kind of spinning out of control. In that moment, I was able to think about how, in the best case scenario, I would want to fall. And I think there was luck involved because I just happened to be set up on this great trajectory to be able to land on this. I mean, I was able to kind of lead that by seeing the path where I thought I could live if I landed there, but yeah, I think there is luck involved in things like that, but also it was mindful pursuit of, success.
And you had probably, as a trauma nurse, you had some experience and kind of knew, because I wouldn't know. I wouldn't have gone, maybe through training, if you have canyoneering training, maybe I would have learned something, but I wouldn't have known that, okay, the best way to fall would be on my feet, standing up, roll my back. Don't hit your head, obviously. But, I don't know that I would have been able to walk through.
Right. And
like
just
that.
thinking of, you need to be loose, be limp like a noodle, be like water. Just let this happen, because a lot of the guarding that happens when you're going through a process like that can actually cause more harm. You should just be in the momentum of the experience.
Right. Which is the exact opposite of how we might react to something. I mean, I know they say that about car accidents too, is that if you stiffen up, there's more room for a trauma or a breakage or something.
Right.
But if you're a little bit more relaxed, then it's less likely. So how long are you in the hospital for?
Not too long, luckily for me. I think they let me out a bit early because they knew that I had a big force of nurses that were going to be caring for me. So I was in the hospital for just a week before I went home. And another really lucky thing about all of this is that my mom is a nurse and she's working, and in her line of work right now, she has some freedom. She's able to take time off and come and move in with me so that I wouldn't have to go to a nursing home for recovery. I had a bunch of stairs to get into my place, so I wasn't able to go to my house. But another lucky thing was that my aunt and uncle have a place a block from mine that's just right on the water, and they have an elevator in their home. So I was able to get up into their place and just recover in one of the most beautiful atmospheres right on the sound and listen to the water.
Was that down on Beach Drive?
Yeah, down on Beach Drive. Yeah. Yeah. So I had one of the most spectacular places that you could ever recover in.
So great. So you got to recover in this great location really close to you, which is really, that's pretty special. And that's really healing in itself, watching the sunset from that view.
Gosh.
I know that view. Yeah.
Yeah. The water just seemed to become my mentor through all of it. I just spend hours staring out at the water, sitting in the sun, listening to the water.
You weren't going crazy?
Questions. Yeah. I mean, it was profoundly difficult because I think, I'm a really active person. The way that I always dealt with stress or difficult times in the past was to move my body, and especially my yoga practice was a huge part of kind of how I would support myself through difficulty. And now my yoga practice has been taken from me. I'm not able to move my body. I'm uncertain about if I'm ever going to do yoga again.
Were you bedridden at that point when you say you were unable to?
For a couple weeks I was, but then I was able to get up into a wheelchair, but I was in a wheelchair for 2 months before my surgeons felt like my pelvis was stable enough to get up and put weight on it. Yeah.
So you didn't get out much.
Well, luckily, because of the elevator, I was able to get down to the water. And I would just, people would take me on walks, but every bump was really difficult. So I mainly just sat in my wheelchair by the water and looked out and asked big questions, and I met a lot of really interesting people down there on the water. But yeah, mainly it was just me and water, just hanging out together.
What were the big questions?
There were days when I felt like I'm not strong enough to overcome this challenge. And what am I going to do? How I have a child I'm supporting. I have to pick myself up at some point. And how am I going to do this? And I guess being in the role of the caregiver instead of the caretaker makes it really challenging to accept help from others. And that was one of my biggest struggles, where there were all these people that wanted to help me, but I was having a hard time accepting the help from other people. And I don't know, one day I just kind of looked out at the water and I see all of the waves rolling in, and I think, well, water is by itself just still. And there's no way for it to make waves without the moon. The moon is what moves the water. Maybe you need others to help move you. Maybe you need to let go and let others be the active players here and just, fall into that. So that's kind of where all these metaphors started, was kind of through reflections like that. And, then I started going to kind of a place of like, okay, I want to embrace all of this. I know if I push away the difficulty of this, that I'm not going to be able to move forward. So I need to feel it all. But how do I feel it all and stay in a sense of peace? How do I feel both? Because this is such a, it's so difficult to figure out how do I embrace it and stay centered. So that was where the next kind of metaphor came from, with like, looking out at the water. There's always so much going on the surface. There could be a huge storm going on the surface of water, right? But in the depths of it all, there's this peace and calm and stillness. So just all of these beautiful things started coming out of reflections of nature, but all started with me just having this perfect location to sit with the water and just listen to whatever needed to come to me through its voice. So that's kind of what started this whole thing, just the fact that when I was falling, I was saying to myself, be like water. And then I ended up in this beautiful place on the sound so that I could be with water for it, so it could talk to me some more and pick me up when I wasn't able to do it for myself. And that's kind of how the documentary started, was by these unique little takes that you got by sitting still with nature.
Yeah. And the documentary is called Be Like Water.
It's called Be Like Water.
And I know I saw the trailer for it. It's not out yet.
No, it's not.
When will it be out?
Well, we're finishing filming this summer. So we're doing the reenactment of the fall in just a couple of weeks. So I have been getting back out into the canyons and rappelling for the first time and facing all of the terror that that ensues. But yeah, I think we'll finish filming this summer, and it's a possibility it'll be 6 months or so before.
So it's a reenactment, like on a reenactment documentary.
Yeah, a portion of the documentary is a reenactment of the fall. We're kind of using the story, and you get to hear about the search and rescue organization and how they played a pivotal role. You get to hear the takes from all of my friends, their experience of this. And then you also get to hear this kind of unique spin on nature and how it has inspired my source of resiliency through all of this. It's kind of woven through. So it's more than just a picture about a tragic event. It's more about where can you find strength in this chaotic world, and you don't necessarily need a book or a guru. You can find it. It's already there. You just have to. It's about how you look.
Well, how do you explain your resiliency?
I think it really started in that moment, where I had to let go of who I was so that I could see more. And I think that is it. It's realizing that that life is what you make of it. And life is built and made up of all of these moments that you can interpret as tragic, or you can choose to look for what they call the silver lining.
Which sounds really cheesy, but I mean, it's like the movie A Beautiful Life. You have two ways to look at your circumstances.
Yeah.
And you're looking at the silver lining.
Right. And, you need to experience it all. You can't just not face reality. You have to face reality as it is. You're laying in this forest and you're broken, and there's so much to be grateful for. You need to see both sides of it, I think, in order to move forward in a healthy way. And that was one of the main things. Of course, there was a lot of support from friends and family, and I couldn't have done it without, just on my own. But I think that underlying understanding of what this human experience is about is really what pulled me forward. It was at the core of who I am, knowing that there's tragedy in life and there's beauty, and it's about how you choose to embrace this. You can grow from it, or you can let it devastate you.
Mm-hmm. So it came to light in that moment during your fall. And then do you feel like for all that time that you sat looking at the water, which sounds delightful, by the way, it actually sounds great. Was it upon like doing that and that reflection that it kind of grew, or was it instantaneous? Like, whoa, like a lightning strike, like, yeah, now I get it. Or was it like, oh, okay, I'm reflecting upon this and now I see we have options, or was it something that was instantaneous for you?
So I think the way that I interpreted the actual traumatic event of me falling was instantaneous. It was, this was how I was going to interpret it. I didn't ever really focus on the negative. I only saw all of the things that set me up for success and the beauty in the moment. But the aftermath of it all, during the recovery process, that was the hard part. You know, everyone's so concentrated on the cool story of me falling, but really the main story is about how you get back up. And that is a longer process, and it ebbs and flows. And you go through moments of darkness where you have to, the only way to move forward is to sit with it and really reflect and look. You have to really look for the positive when you're feeling that sense of loss and devastation in your life. And I think as long as you're willing to sit with it, eventually it moves.
How do you not want to sit there and just eat cake and drink beer? And, have, peanut butter filled pretzels. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I can imagine like there's got to be some level of depression in there.
Yeah.
And what happens is you don't feel good. You have maybe just a slight bit of depression, and then you don't eat well and you drink, and then that feeds upon itself. So how do you, and did you even prevent yourself from doing that? Like how do you, like you look very healthy. Like, you look like a very healthy, happy person. How do you keep yourself the healthy, happy Nichole and not fall into that trap?
I think the greatest gift of all of this was a more integrated gratitude practice. I started, of course, I would some days wake up and just think nothing but negative, lifeless thoughts of how this is horrible. I'm in the prime of my life. I was at the strongest I had ever been. And now I'm in a wheelchair. And now I'm losing it all. And I'm losing my job. And I'm losing my friends. And I'm losing, I'm financially devastated and all of this. And then, I would have to make a choice to say, okay, I'm going to sit here until I can think of one thing I'm grateful for, and oftentimes it would start out really ridiculous. The Eeyore in me would be like, okay, what am I grateful for? Well, I guess I am really grateful for ketamine. That's kind of where it would start. And then I would say, oh yeah, I'm grateful for my friendships, and I'm grateful that I have this beautiful place to recover in. And oh yeah, I'm really grateful for recliner chairs. And I'm grateful that somebody brought me those little tennis balls to put on the back of my walker, and it ended up being this endless stream of things to be grateful for. So many more things to be grateful for than things to be upset about. And I would practice. It was a way of rewiring the brains to focus on the positive, because we are developed. That's the way humans are developed for, basically, so that we'll stay alive, is that we focus more on the negative so that we know what we need to fix so that we can stay alive, right? So it's about, you have to make a choice to look at the positive. And the more you look at it, the more you see that you can balance this story, and not only balance it, but weigh it in your favor, because reality is there is a lot more to be grateful for than to be upset about. Yeah.
And I imagine, do you still fall into those days of, these are my words because you've never said this, but kind of like, why me? Like, why did this happen to me? Or are you pretty much like, yeah, I'm on course now and it's all good?
Yeah, I mean, I did say, why me? And the answer was because there's something more you're supposed to be given. This is your platform. This is your opportunity. This is, that is the answer to my why me. And that came pretty early on. I knew that I was interpreting this in a different way than a lot of the patients that I had seen, and that it felt like it was coming from something more than me. It was like I was a conduit for a message, and that I was just here to tell the message of, this is what I'm going to do with this. It's why me? Because I'm supposed to spread the word of, how others can become stronger from challenges instead of let it define you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you're back at the hospital as a trauma nurse?
Yeah, I am. I just started work actually last week. After all of this happened, I went back to work, and I was struggling with a lot of pain and didn't really realize, I'd always been told chronic back pain. And so I thought, well, maybe this is what it looks like. But actually what happened was all of the hardware broke. My back was still broken, and I was working in the trauma center with a broken back and broken hardware. Didn't know it until it became obvious by looking at me. You could literally see the hardware starting to kind of try to poke its way out of my back. And so I had to go and start over again, go through all of the surgeries all over again.
So what happened? After the initial fall, did you have back surgery?
I had back surgery. Yeah, I had back surgery. They put hardware in. I followed all of the rules of, that the surgeons gave me. But after a certain amount of time, 2 months or so, they say you're safe to get up and go back to work. And we really don't know. I'm young and healthy. Mm-hmm. There's really no reason why things shouldn't have healed. But so we thought, well.
So when you went back to work and you were having this pain, you just thought it was residual?
Yeah. I thought, everyone had told me once you've had a back surgery, you'll always have chronic back pain. And I thought, well, maybe this is chronic back pain. Maybe this is just what I have to figure out how to live with, So I didn't realize that there was a huge problem until it was obvious. And so then went to see the surgeon, and he said, oh, your spinal cord is kind of like blowing in the wind right now. We should probably have you lay down. And so I was just getting back on my feet, I felt like, and then had to start over.
And when did you have that next round of surgeries?
That was in January of this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then back to work a week ago, you said?
A week ago.
Wow.
So I had a whole 6 months off to this time. He said, we're just not going to take any chances. We don't know why it didn't work last time. And this time there's definitely no yoga at all for a good year, and no work, because as a nurse, you kind of don't have a choice but to use improper body mechanics from time to time to take care of people. Sure. So just very protective. And this time around, it's going so much better.
So what'd you do with your time for 6 months?
Well, I had a trip planned to Africa in February. So when I found out in January that I was going to go through all this again, I thought, oh, my trip is canceled. I'm just going to be out, all of that. But somehow 3 weeks after surgery, I was on a plane to Africa. I thought, if I'm going to heal anywhere, it's going to be in the sun and by the water, because of my last experience. I just didn't want to be sitting in the gloom and doom of dark Seattle winter trying to heal.
Where did you go?
So we went to South Africa and drove the coast and experienced the whole coastline. And then we stayed in a monkey rescue and took care of baby vervet monkeys and baboons, and just had one of the most beautiful trips to Africa. So it was a great place to heal. I was there for a month, and then came back and really just focused on saying yes to people that were reaching out to me. As soon as I got back, people were asking me to come and, maybe could you give a little lecture about resiliency to our fire department? We just, they had just had a tragedy in there. Everyone was struggling. So this is a great way for me to focus on the positive and continue to remind myself of, how I can heal is by keeping my mind in the right positive space, So it's been really a huge part of my healing process. I'm getting just as much out of it as I'm giving. So,
To bring this around to the beginning of the conversation, because I did not realize that this was an issue, but you were saying that people who are working in this kind of environment do see a lot of PTSD.
Yeah.
And it surprised me. And I actually, when we were talking on the phone, I had to come back around to that. I was like, wait a minute, is this what you just said? That when you're witnessing these kinds of traumas that they can come back because, you know, when we watch the thrillers and the drama series on TV, it's all wrapped up in a nice little bow for the most part when the cops or the detectives are dealing with an issue. Those are the ones that I watch, but I know that there's like ER and many other ones that are based in the hospital, and you don't see how that affects them, in the long term.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that and how people are dealing with it and not dealing with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're all human, right? So when you are the nurse in the trauma bay and a baby comes in that just fell out of a window and you're trying to resuscitate them in front of their parents who are crying and you taking on the responsibility to save the child as well as support this mother who's falling apart thinking that this is her fault, and then not being able to save the child no matter what you do. And then, maybe 5 minutes goes by before the next thing rolls through the door. And it's an elderly woman who just got hit by a city bus, and you're doing everything you can to take care of her and also still processing what just happened with this baby that fell out of the window. And then,
you don't have
and then
time
you go to
for
the
it.
next thing. There's no time to reflect, right, as a group. There's one tragedy after the next, and you go home at the end of the day and you have questions in your mind. Did I do everything that I could have done? Was I, did I do my diligence not just as a nurse, but as a human? Was I able to focus on everything that I needed to? And, there are moments where you're like, no, I totally failed that lady. I was too focused on the thing that was coming in the door next to be able to really support her. Or, no, I did the best I could, but maybe I could have given that medication faster, or maybe I could have contacted the right person faster. And you go home with all of this and there's nobody to talk to because nobody at home understands the war zone that you just came from. And it's kind of a hidden thing that people don't realize that healthcare professionals come home with. And we have one another to talk to in this situation, but there's also this culture of we don't talk about it because, there's this understanding that you knew what you're getting into when you went into it. So if you don't know how to support yourself, then you may not be doing it right,
Or if you allow yourself to get vulnerable, then you may be more vulnerable in the next situation too.
Right.
I imagine there's got to be that fear.
Yeah, it's a protective mechanism for sure. You don't want to feel, a lot of people don't want to feel it all. They don't want to take it home with them. So then there's not only, are you wanting to perform to the best of your ability in that moment and not getting overcome by emotion. That's one of the reasons why people form these poor coping strategies. But also, you don't want to go home with it. You don't want to think about that child that died in front of you today. You want to just kind of block yourself in some way from feeling it all. But what you don't realize is that if you start turning off your emotions at work, it starts to show up in all kinds of other areas of your life too. You don't have a choice of when and where emotions are shut off. So this thing that you thought you were doing to protect yourself, it literally causes divorce and addiction. And it, causes you to start looking for more and more kind of reckless ways to feel something. Because
whether that's drinking or drugs,
right.
I would imagine, eating.
It can show up in so many different ways, and it's all kind of stemming from this protective mechanism of turning your emotions off in these situations. So I've been trying to start there by just opening people's eyes to the fact that this is actually a negative way to kind of deal with your work environment.
Well, it's got to be so ingrained. How do you shift the tide of that? How do you make those changes?
It starts really small. It starts with feeling what you're feeling in the moment. The first thing you have to do is pause and feel the emotion that is in your body in this moment. Give yourself permission to feel what it is that you're feeling. And then, after you go home, maybe reflect on it. What was I feeling in that moment? It could be that you were nearly brought to your knees by the sight of something, or that you were hardly affected at all by something that's pretty dramatic, And so by asking yourself questions from a place of curiosity instead of judgment, I think you can get to a lot of the answers that you're looking for inside of yourself. Nobody's going to be able to find that for you. You have to take the time to do the self-reflection and find out what's at the root of it all. And then once you find the truth of what's at the root of it all, you have to give yourself compassion. You have to, no matter what, even if what you uncover is ugly and you're not proud of it, you have to give yourself compassion for what you're feeling.
Are there different levels of this? Meaning, like a trauma nurse might see the worst of it, or a search and rescue person in a helicopter might see the worst of it. And then a doctor in the ER is going to see some pretty traumatic things. And then a doctor of another level or another specialty is probably not going to be quite as traumatized, or a firefighter might be at some level. Like, do you think of it in terms of that? Like, there's kind of the base, the worst of it is one layer, and then it just it gets a little bit easier depending on where a person might find themselves in their specialty.
Well, I work all over the hospital system, and what I feel to be the truth, I think anybody could answer this in a different way, but what I feel is that anytime you're working in an environment where you can't save them all, everyone is exposed to the same amount of trauma. It's at the root of what we do. People are going to die. And so you're not able to ever really protect yourself from the vulnerable position you're placing yourself in as a caregiver and in this field. And, some might say that the emergency room, you experience less trauma because you don't have time to form an emotional connection with the patient. Whereas if you were working on an oncology ward, you have years with this person, So it's really, I think, person dependent on how much, what you interpret as trauma, and seeing the unbelievable things that come in through the emergency room and seeing it in such a open way where, there's gaping wounds and that kind of thing can be super traumatic to one person, but maybe not as traumatic as it would be to someone who has more trauma from the emotional connections with people, So it's hard to say who's going to interpret it which way, but I think we're all at risk for sure.
Prior to your accident, where was your headspace as a trauma nurse?
So my journey with mindfulness started 20 years ago when I got into healthcare. I was maybe 2 weeks off of orientation as a new nurse on the night shift, and this neurosurgeon came strolling into my patient's bedside with a drill in his hand and said, I need to do some emergency burr holes at the bedside, and that means that he's going to drill 2 holes in my patient's head while I'm standing there. And I had been taught how to take care of the patient in that moment, but I had no idea how to take care of myself, and I knew that this was just the beginning of the strange things that I was going to be seeing in this line of work. And so, I was like, okay, I don't know what to do to protect myself, but I know I need to figure out how. So I'm just going to go home and do a Google search. I'm going to do a Google search and I'm going to figure this out. And it might take me a week, but I'm going to figure it out. And here I am 20 years later, still experimenting on myself. And I've done everything from,
Was there Google search 20 years ago?
Yeah. It was more of like looking at books and trying to figure it out. But yeah. And so I've done everything from energy work to Eckhart Tolle and everything in between, trying to, experiment and find what works for me. And I've every day come a little bit closer.
Well, do you think you're unique in that aspect? Because I don't come in contact with a lot of trauma nurses, but it just seems to me that more people are working to avoid their feelings than they are trying to get in touch with them.
There is a lot of avoidance that happens, and there's a lot of people who feel like they're not avoiding because they're talking about it with their coworkers, but they're talking about it in a ruminating way where you're just focusing
over gin and tonics.
Right, exactly. Instead of like a way that could move you towards growth, you know. So I think there's a lot of great information out there, and it's been my passion since I started nursing, basically because I needed to find a way to support myself that was healthy and meaningful. And you don't know what you're getting into until you're in it, you know. So maybe it is unique. I don't have a lot of people who have the same background that I do that are dealing with it in the same way that I am. But I have found a sense of peace, and not just peace, but I really do enjoy my work. You know, I really feel like it's an honor to be with people when they're in these tragic moments, and to try to hold a safe space for them. And it's one of the greatest gifts that I've had in this life. I mean, it's the perfect platform.
And you felt that before the accident too,
yeah,
right?
I did, but I didn't always, you know. When I started and I didn't have any tools of how to protect myself, I felt like, what in the heck did I get myself into? Like, this is crazy. I shouldn't be here. I'm not the right person for this, you know, because we aren't taught in medical school or in nursing school how to carry ourselves and how to ground ourselves. And
what part of what you're doing with the documentary and with speaking to groups is you're trying to change that environment. Is that right? I
would love to do nothing less than give my friends some tools of how to move through this. Everyone gets into it for the right reasons, you know, but then you're just walking in as a bleeding heart, someone that wants to do more, and you're in an environment where you're set up for failure in a lot of cases because we aren't in control of the outcome, no matter what we do in some situations. So I think healthcare in general is shifting the focus. There's a Joint Commission, which is a regulatory commission that sets standards for healthcare, is really focusing on trying to change the work environment and deal with some of this because of the statistics about suicide and things that are happening in healthcare. So
in terms of suicide, what are you seeing? A high rate of suicide amongst a certain population, like certain nurses or doctors, or trauma over ER, like to go back to my earlier question in terms of like, where is the severity the worst? And like, is there kind of a pyramid of how that works?
Well, unfortunately, not all of it has been studied deeply. When we started uncovering the statistics about physicians and, you know, frontline workers, we realized that there really hasn't been any information gathered about nurses. So I don't know what the statistics are, but I do know that I've lost friends to suicide in this profession. And I know that
in the Seattle area?
Yeah, in the Seattle area, back where I came from in Illinois, I've lost a friend there as well. And they're silent sufferers, you know, no one's really talking about it. But there are papers out about physician suicide, and, you know, the rates of physician suicide are 2 times that of active duty military members, which is shocking.
Yeah, because we hear that.
Yeah.
There's like, what is the statistic for retired military folks? Do you know it's something like 1 every 22 seconds?
Yeah.
Or do I have that correct? Do you know?
I'm not sure about
there is some statistic that is unbelievable. And I know there are a lot of people out there who are trying to get this, you know, out, you know, more publicly, but it is some statistic that is crazy, just really crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I didn't know that about the doctors.
Yeah, it's very sad. And, you know, I think it's the perfect time for me to be starting these lectures, because everybody is kind of opening their eyes to this for the first time, that this is a huge problem, and we can't just leave people to deal with it on their own anymore.
No.
We need to like integrate this into, you know, their medical school and nursing school, and form like peer support groups and try to do something, because people are floundering. They're literally dying because
I hope you have a book. I hope you have a book in there that's going to come out.
Yeah,
You need more time by the water.
We'll see. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's been an amazing adventure is what I can say, that I would never turn back time and take this experience and change it into something else, because so much has come out of it. And I'm just going to continue to say yes. So yeah, I'm doing what I can with the gift I was given.
Yeah. You're raising money right now, right, for search and rescue?
Yeah, we're trying to do a fundraiser so that we can finish our documentary. Kind of our theory about the documentary, it all sprang out of wanting to raise money for search and rescue. And we thought, well, you kind of need a human interest story to get people to want to donate to an organization or something. So we're using my story as a platform to try to raise awareness about search and rescue. And so we're having a fundraiser soon. We have a little short little trailer about the documentary that we're making, and hoping that we can develop an online presence and get people interested in what we're doing so that we can make a difference in their world, because these people are amazing. You know, the search and rescue guys that I've become close with, they tell me stories about how they moved their entire family so that they could be closer to, to their search and rescue gig, and how they take unpaid time off work so that they can volunteer, and how they have such an extreme attention to detail and want to be the best at what they do for something that they don't necessarily get recognized for. And they're not doing it for the recognition.
Right. They're just really motivated.
They just want, their motto is so that others may live. And that's how they live their life, and they're incredible humans. So anyway, just really takes a lot of money to have a helicopter and have these things that they need so that they can be successful and pull silly girls like me off of mountains.
So that you can live to tell your story.
Right. It's a big circle, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it sure is. You had mentioned that prior to the accident, you felt like and this is a prior discussion between you and I don't think we've talked about this yet, but you felt like you couldn't break out of a mold of who you were. You were kind of headed down a path, if that's right. And then that accident just kind of shifted everything for you. What was going on for you prior to that?
Well, I don't know. I feel like, I've always been kind of a quiet, introverted person, but with these big, grand ideas about something I'm going to do in this life, and I couldn't quite reach it. I knew that I was going to do something that was going to integrate everything that I had experienced in life up to this point. It's going to integrate, not only my nursing, but my yoga background and my focus on spirituality. And, it's going to take the strength that I developed by being a single mom, and it's going to just kind of all culminate into this one thing that's going to be just, I don't know what it is, but it's going to be great,
Kerthunk.
Right.
It's called a big fall.
Exactly. But I couldn't find my voice. I couldn't find what I was supposed to do with it. And, while I was staring out the water after everything that I had been through, I was reflecting back on how I felt like something inside of me was going to have to break in order for me to find my voice. I said, I just could not get out of this mold of who I had created myself to be, so that I could, become this step into this next moment of my existence. And it was in that moment where I'm laying on the forest floor saying, I have no control of who I am. This reality that I once knew no longer exists. And now I have to invent myself again. I don't have a choice but to reinvent myself in this moment. So that gave me so much freedom. It was as if all of the rules were gone, and I was free to take on any role I wanted to, and I guess after coming so close to death, you realize what's most important, and that there's really only one thing to be afraid of, and that is not living fully, And I didn't have any regrets, I guess. I reflected a bit about, if I would have died that day, would I have any regrets? And the only thing was that I need to live more fully. Life is happening now. And you don't have an unlimited amount of time to go after the things that really matter most in your life. So you can't let things like fear hold you back, because it's really just an illusion anyway, you know.
Had you had any other like premonition or dream like you did the night prior to your accident, where you said to yourself, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't go"? Like, I know, and I think a lot of times we don't remember those because then nothing significant happened, so it doesn't stick with us.
Yeah.
But do you ever recall over the years having something like that, and then nothing came to fruition, or maybe something did?
Oh, I'm not sure about a specific story that I can bring to mind right now, but yeah, there have been many moments in my life where I have felt like I didn't know what was coming next, but something is coming. You know, I felt it before I became a mom. I felt it before I moved to Seattle. It's like momentum is building, and it's all of this energy is pushing, and you're on the brink of something that's coming, but you don't know what it is.
Kind of the universe kind of pushing you along.
Yeah, kind of pushing you along. Yeah, for sure. So I had been feeling that sensation, like I said, when trying to figure out what am I going to do that's going to culminate all these things. I had been feeling that pretty intensely before this accident, and I didn't put two and two together and link that sensation with this, knowing that something's going to happen in this canyon. But after it was over, I don't know if it was just my mind put the two together, and that's just the way I want to experience it, or if it actually is what happened. But somehow the two molded together and put me on a new path.
You had mentioned the ketamine. Were you on other drugs?
During my recovery, so they put me on all kinds of, oxycodone is the pain medication that they sent me home on and gave me while I was in the hospital. And there's a lot of stuff in the news right now about,
of course, about the addiction,
narcotics. Yeah. And my experience with narcotics has changed the way that I nurse, for sure.
How so?
Well, I felt like the side effects from the narcotics were actually worse than experiencing the pain of, the physical injury.
What were the side effects?
The side effects for me were the withdrawal was horrible, just nausea and cloudy mind and a disconnection from, I felt like my being was floating outside of my body, and I couldn't integrate the two so that I could be strong enough to move forward.
That was as you were coming off?
Yeah. Deep depression. Boy. Horrible. It felt like poison. It felt like I had poisoned myself, and
did you feel good when you were on it?
While I was on it, so it never took the pain away, was the thing. They say it's a pain medication, but it really just makes you not care.
I've heard the same. I've heard the same thing about antidepressants. That it's like it doesn't. I still feel depressed, but I don't care.
Yeah. And do you want to live a life where you just are that disconnected? I don't know. And, most people don't realize that it doesn't take very long before you start to develop a physical dependency to this stuff. It only takes a few days, really, before you have to worry about that. And
so now you're more careful about.
I just I quit. I quit a day after I got out of the hospital. I quit taking narcotics because I could just tell that it was not the drug of choice for me. It wasn't treating the pain to begin with. So why continue, And now I tell my patients, so they're going to give you the option of taking narcotics. And just so you know, the side effects of these medications are oftentimes worse than the actual physical pain. And you need to realize that what you've been through is going to cause pain. You're not going to be able to get rid of all of the pain. So you're going to need to find a way to form a new relationship with
Do you
pain.
share your story?
Yeah, I do. Actually, the first person that I took care of last week when I went back to work for the first time was a man who was getting pre-opted to go in for the very same surgery that I had just had. And he was terrified, didn't think that he was going to wake up, didn't know if he would be paralyzed when he came out. I told him my story. I said, look at me, I'm walking around. I'm not just walking. I'm, really feeling vibrant and I still have pain, but it doesn't keep me from living my life, So, yeah, it's been great to be able to support people and they find it meaningful for sure.
Before we wrap up here, I do have a question. We got connected through a mutual friend, through Chris Mackay, who's also been on the podcast. We did this great, fun live event a couple of months ago. How do you know Chris?
Well, so I moved to Seattle kind of spur of the moment. I was this girl from a small farm town who kind of always felt like I could never just stay here. I need to find my way out. And I had a friend who was coming to Seattle to go to graduate school. And I thought, this is my opportunity. I don't know anything about Seattle, but I'm just going to
hitch a ride.
Exactly. So I basically gave away everything I owned in over a 2-week time period. And I was a single mom at the time. I had a 6-year-old daughter, and we hopped in the car and bought ourselves a couple of cowgirls hats and just headed west.
How fun.
So we had nothing but 2 forks and 2 spoons and 2 plates and a SUV full of toys, basically, and just took off. And once I got here, it didn't take me very long to figure out just how naive it was to move thousands of miles away from all of your support network when you have this child. Yeah. So within a few months, I had burned through all of my financial reserve, and I was, I think it was $254 in my pocket, which was in my mind just enough money, gas money, to get back to where I came from. And I thought, either I'm going to figure this out today or I'm going to pack up and move back. And so I just was searching and looked on Craigslist, and I found this ad that said, single mom looking for the same, someone to share child care and housing responsibilities with.
Was that Chris?
I was terrified. It was Chris. I thought, this is really ridiculous. I'm going to go find a roommate off of Craigslist, and I am a single mom, and I've got this big, what am I thinking? But I thought, well, it's my last chance. So I went and knocked on this door, and I opened it up to Chris Mackay, and she's standing there in her flannel, and we just instantly connected. And
oh my God, she's such a good person to know, especially for a first experience in Seattle.
My gosh, yeah, she's this wildlife ecologist who took me all over the Pacific Northwest and helped me to fall in love with this area. And her daughter was very similar age to mine, and they were obvious soul sisters from the very beginning. And so it was a story of two single moms really struggling to survive, who came together to support one another in this unique way, where she would work, I would stay home and watch the kids, and when I worked, she did the same for me, and we were able to get ourselves back on our feet financially. And
did you go to nursing school here or
no, in Illinois? Okay. Yeah. So yeah, it was just a really cool way to meet someone, and she's been my family ever since, for sure. Yeah.
That is really neat. Yeah. She's a good egg for sure.
Yeah.
Did you raise your daughter all on your own? Wow.
Yeah.
Big deal. What's she like today? Is she a big adventurer?
Oh, she's amazing.
You said she's 17.
Yeah. I've always told people that she's raising me more than I'm raising her. I think because I was a young mom, we kind of grew up together. And she's just this old soul who's so grounded, and she really knows what really matters in life, and kind of keeps me even. So, yeah, she's been one of my greatest teachers for sure.
How did she handle the accident?
She was not in town. She was with my mom in Illinois when I fell. So for 4 days, she could only talk to me on the phone, and she said to her friends, my mom says she's fine. She's telling me stories about rainbows, and I just don't think she's okay. So she sent her friends to come lay eyes on me in the hospital. And then when she got here, I thought, well, this is either going to devastate her and, be really challenging, or she's going to grow from it. And luckily it was the latter. You know, she really got to watch what a community looks like and see so many people supporting me and rallying around me. And she said to me, you know, Mom, I'm no closer to knowing what I want to do in this life, but I know who I want to be from watching all of this, you know. So
Oh my God.
I know.
Like, how amazing is that?
Yeah. She's,
Wow.
I told you, she's an old soul. She'll bring tears to your eyes.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well, hopefully I'll get to meet her sometime. Wow. I end these conversations, because I want to hear how we can support your efforts and find out more information about your documentary. But I like to wrap these up with asking, what does it mean to you to be bold?
I think to be vulnerable, you know, to open up to the idea of just being who you are and letting down the walls, letting go of trying to impress or trying to be something that you're not, just showing who you are and all of the sides of it, the light and the dark, so that others may find some sort of inspiration and feel more connected.
Thanks for that. And finally, where can people find you in the documentary and keep up with all things
we
Nichole?
have
Nichole with an H.
That's right.
Nichole.
That's right. belikewaterfilm.com is our website, and you can follow us on Instagram and on Facebook by just looking up Be Like Water Film.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And I'll link to that in the show notes
Great.
as well. So, oh my gosh, so great to meet you.
It's great to be
and
here
to hear
too.
your story, and thank you so much for sharing, because it's really special on so many levels. So thanks for enlightening me and then just sharing your big heart too.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Doesn't she have an amazing story? Now, I would not wish her experience on anyone, but we could all certainly learn from her experience what she went through, certainly by slowing down and enjoying the beauty in the world. For links to all the things we chatted about in this episode, including the trailer to her forthcoming documentary, go to shesboldpodcast.com/episodes, and there you will find the show notes for this and all of my other conversations. You can also find those links and show notes in whatever podcast app it is you're using to listen to this. If you'd like to support the show and let me know how much you are inspired by these conversations and how much you look forward to hearing all of this positive information in a time when we are kind of surrounded by so much negativity, go to shesboldpodcast.com/Patreon. Patreon supporters get access to bonus content, which is usually in the form of a question I ask the guest. This week, you'll find out what some may call the mystical experience that Nichole had during that fall, a connection she had with a family member who had died just a few weeks prior to the accident. Don't forget to check out my tours at wandertours.com, WANDER tours.com. I've got trips to Morocco, Papua New Guinea, and culinary tours to Seattle and Santa Fe coming up. You can connect with me by friending me on Facebook, and I'm WanderGal on Instagram. Ladies, you can join the Be Bold Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/BeBoldGroup for support and encouragement for whatever ways you're trying to be bold. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. Until next time, be bold.